Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Pat Flynn Show. Extremely excited for my guest today. He is a returning guest. Father Steve, welcome back, and glad to have you.
Pat, it's so good to be here, and a long time no talk to. We should have done this sooner, but I'm really pleased that we can do this today.
Yeah, so am I. So you sent me an article a few weeks ago that was really interesting on the relationships between health and religion. So that's going to be the primary topic today. But before we get into that, just give us an update. What's new in the world of Father Steve and Word on Fire? I know you guys have a lot of new exciting things, projects going on, but both personally and professionally, I'd love to just hear what you've been up to.
Well, Word on Fire is just growing like gangbusters, and we're just in this phenomenal period of growth and production. We're producing, continuing our production of a major documentary series, a 12-part series, and we're doing 2 more episodes of that series called Pivotal Players in June and July. So there's going to be a lot of kind of traveling and production issues to kind of contend with. And then the bishop is doing a major evangelization tour in Ireland and the UK in August and September.
Wow.
So we're working out all the kind of details of that. For some of your listeners who might not know, Word on Fire is an apostolate or ministry of Bishop Robert Barron. So he's doing this kind of really, really intense evangelization tour of Ireland and the UK this August and September. And then right now we're in the midst of the release of a new film and study program on the Mass, which is Catholicism's primary form of worship. And then on the tail of that one in September, we're launching a new online educational institute called the Word on Fire Institute. So we're doing all the kind of back-end coursework and study guides and everything for that. So lots going on, real positive stuff. We're busy in the best way possible because it's all creative, engaging, and interesting.
Well, my mind is absolutely boggled because, I mean, on top of all that, you're still engaging in your priestly duties as well, right?
That's right. I'm engaging in priestly duties at a parish in Santa Barbara, and I'm keeping up the bodybuilding too. So I'm staying in shape. So I haven't fallen off the wagon of that either.
Yeah, so maybe we can get into. I know our first conversation was all about trying to maintain some semblance of balance when you're just trying to be productive in so many different ways. But I'd like to kind of touch back on that maybe towards the end, and I think it'll probably fit in nicely to our overall conversation. But a few just personal questions, because I love the Catholicism series. It was specifically the series that, because I don't know if I even told you this, that my wife got baptized at the Easter Vigil.
You did not tell me that. Well, congratulations and welcome to your wife.
Yeah, but we owe you a huge thank you because it was her watching that Catholicism series that just really helped her to understand the religion, to appreciate the religion, and really fall in love with the religion. So it was, and I'm not, decorating this at all. It was very much directly due to the work that you guys have been doing over at Word of Fire that led to her baptism.
Well, I'm going to share that information with Bishop Barron and his team because we love those stories. We kind of put out all these films and projects, and they're like seeds that we're kind of scattering. Mm-hmm. And then occasionally we get these beautiful stories of conversion and changed lives, that people's lives are better for having seen these films and used these materials. So that's really important for me that you shared that with me today. And yeah. I'm going to let Bishop Barron and his team know.
Well, yeah, by all means. I mean, it really has been a blessing, and we can't, thank you guys enough for the awesome work that you've been doing. And I think that might be a good segue into our topic, because you mentioned how people's lives are often so improved when they start to become more spiritual, more religious, and not just in an emotional state, even though everything's sort of connected, but in physical health as well. And the article that you sent me, and I have it right here, I want to pull it up so that way we don't misquote any of the statistics or anything, was really all about the research behind physical health and religious and spiritual practice. So this was kind of a dense article, but it wasn't too dense, and it went through a bunch of different statistics on biomarkers and body weight and body mass index and a whole bunch of different things. But what really kind of grabbed your interest or speaks to you about this article, just from a kind of general level, and then maybe we could get a little bit more specific about it?
Well, the article is entitled, "Is It Healthy to Be Catholic?" But at the beginning of it, there's this kind of great, breathtaking stats or statements about how religion or religious practice contributes positively to physical health. And the study after study, that's demonstrated. Religious people are less likely to smoke, for example. Mm-hmm. They're more likely to exercise. And religious people eat healthier diets. They have lower blood cholesterol. So there's all these kind of stats out there that are indicating the positive benefit of religious practice on people's lives. And there's a lot of kind of noise in the culture about the problems of religion, or religion being kind of a negative force in society in terms of personal lives. So to kind of read this and see concrete kind of stats, statistics, objective data that's telling a different kind of story, that there's a benefit to being religious. And as you said, it's not just emotions or a matter of intellect. Those things are very, very important, but it's a matter of your physicality, of your own body. And so I found that to be fascinating.
Yeah, so I want to just read a quick snippet here for the listeners, because I think it sums up some of the main points really well. And we'll link this in the show notes so everybody can see it for themselves as well. And I'm quoting here: "The most impressive research on the relationship between religion and spirituality and physical health is in the area of mortality. At least 121 studies have examined relationships between religion and mortality. Considering the 63 methodologically most rigorous studies, quality ratings of 8 or higher, 75% found religion and spiritual practices predicting greater longevity, whereas 5% reported shorter." So that is very statistically significant. Another systematic review and 2 meta-analyses have confirmed that this relationship between religion and spirituality and longer survival as well. So it was funny because I was kind of joking when I sent you this email, Father Steve, but I think there's something of an argument to be made of like a pseudo Pascal's wager here, in a sense that if somebody is just completely agnostic, like they feel like they have no dog in the fight either way. They could be religious or they could be not, but say they cared about health and happiness or specifically longevity. It seems like you would be the most rational thing you could do at that point would just go ahead and be religious anyways, right?
Yeah, it would seem that way. And then that's a very interesting kind of apologetic argument. But I was also thinking to myself, well, why wouldn't a clinical practitioner like a nutritionist or a doctor recommend religion as a way towards optimal health? These studies are indicating this, that, the way that they might prescribe certain medication or exercise or lifestyle changes, that they might indicate, actually religious people have a tendency to kind of score higher in terms of optimal health and a longer life. You might want to try that. I know that's bold and audacious, but it seems like the statistics are supporting that, would support that approach.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up. I am in a group, and I don't even know if it might be the Word on Fire group. You'll have to remind me if this was a thread in there. But there is a doctor in that group who was saying this very thing. And the doctor was saying, hey, statistically, there are great reasons to be religious. Like, how many of you would think that it would be inappropriate or weird if I recommended religion to people as a doctor? And then there was a whole thread and discussion, based on that. But at least this one doctor realize this, but you're right. Maybe it's just a cultural taboo or whatever. But it seems like you would almost have something of a under the Hippocratic Oath to at least maybe mention it, right?
Well, it would seem that way, and it might be kind of our secular prejudices would see something like that as being unseemly. But if you had something in a pharmacological tool or a methodology of exercise that was really, really successful, and somebody came to you and withheld that information from them because of some social or cultural taboo, you'd be a bad physician or a bad trainer. But here we have this, there's these studies that are showing that, religion is actually helpful for people. Why not share it with people? Again, I don't know what criteria of evangelization that kind of fits into it. It seems to me like a softer approach, but it would be our secular prejudices that would kind of rail against it. But I would think that, I guess it would be something, it would be a question to legitimately ask, that your quality of life can improve in relation to religious practice. So maybe that's something to give a try.
Yeah, one of my great friends he's a family doctor, and he's always frustrated by just how few doctors recommend any type of lifestyle change or practice in general, as opposed to just prescribing medication. And his whole big thing is using, exercise and healthy eating is the primary, preventive measure. But I'm going to talk to him about this, and I'm going to throw this his way, and I'll ask him. His name's Dr. Spencer. I'll put him on the spot. I'll be like, yeah, how would you feel about prescribing? Maybe if it's not even like religion or something in general starting out, but at least we could use the term spirituality or something. Like you said, maybe it's a softer evangelization at the beginning. But what's interesting about this article is it does specifically target Catholics as well, and there's something to be said about the specificity of it too. But then there's this kind of this odd thing of like, okay, this really is statistically significant. This is, by all accounts, it seems like a very prudential thing for humans to engage in if they are concerned about their health, well-being, longevity, etc. So it would seem like not recommending it is doing a disservice on some level.
Yeah. Pat, another thing that surprised me reading this was that the level of good health among Catholics. Because here's the thing that might have been skewing my perception for many years, but I've been kind of a great advocate of priestly health, that priests need to get in shape. They need to get their nutritional lives in order and things like that, that there's a relationship between the mission of the priest and their optimal physical flourishing. And oftentimes that's not really looked at as a dynamic in how well priests are doing. So my attention is usually kind of focused on priests, and I just don't think priests are that healthy. That's my perception. That's what I've come to know. The priests need a lot of help in that area. So as I read through the survey, it's saying, the Catholic adult is pretty healthy. And I'm wondering about your impression about that.
My impression would be similar to yours. I know just in my community, I was very pleasantly surprised as I began to get more and more involved with the church of just how active the community and events and fellowship were. I mean, for example, we went to a fellowship event last night where we were praying the rosary, but we were praying it on a long hike. I'm like, this is fantastic. It's a deep spiritual practice. We have our community, our fellowship we're binding, and we're engaging in really useful physical exercise. So that was something that definitely struck me. And the physical components of fellowship were always out. And, I can only speak for my church, St. Pat's in Malvern, PA. I haven't done a survey across the nation or anything, but this was something that I was very enheartened and enlivened and very excited about as I became more and more involved with the community. It's just really just how active it is, not just in its spiritual practice and how seriously it takes it, but in really how physical it is too. Almost all the events we do, and we have one event a week, there, like sometimes we go rock climbing, we go to trampoline parks, and other times we do like really kind of sit and talk philosophy and meditate. But there's so much physicality to it, and I have my bias at being in the fitness space, but I love it. I mean, I really do.
Yeah, it's impressive, and surveys like this always kind of beg for me meta questions. So it's like if Catholics are kind of skewing at a certain level in a particular survey, I want to take it deeper and kind of unpack theological, metaphysical, philosophical implications. And so as I read this kind of positive survey about Catholics and their physical health and their relationship with that to their religion or their spirituality, I was thinking to myself, well, why is Catholicism having this impact? What is it at the deeper level that's creating this positive impact on the lives of Catholics? And one of the things that occurred to me, and you might have your own commentary and experience on this, is that Catholicism is a deeply embodied religion. It's deeply embodied. The body matters. The body's at the forefront. The practices of the faith engage the body, even in terms of our worship with our sitting, our standing, our kneeling. You have to be bodily attentive in terms of the act of worship. Days of feasting and fasting, again, the body is engaged. And then even in the visual imagery of Catholicism is so body-oriented. The statues in the churches, the paintings, all kind of privileging the representation of the human form. And in a sense, our works of charity are really about caring for bodies. It isn't just kind of making a donation to a cause, but how have you met Christ in the body of another person? And so that kind of placing the body at the forefront of the religion, I think it causes people to think about their own bodies and how that body is used and engaged in terms of religious practice. And so I think that might raise attentiveness in terms to the importance of these issues of health.
Yeah, that's something that also stood out to me when I really started to study Aquinas and a lot of the other Catholic philosophers of how essentially the soul contains a body, right? It's not just this Cartesian ghost in a machine where the body is something you're trying to escape from necessarily, right. Something you're really actively participating in. So, I mean, I think your theory sounds perfectly sound, Father Steve.
And it's all flowing from this kind of the central pivot on which the Catholic faith is turning, which is that God in Christ accepts a human body as his own. That's kind of the centerpiece of Christian revelation. And as I said, it's the kind of still point around which all the practices of the Catholic Church are turning. The incarnation, God takes on flesh. And what that indicates to us is that our flesh, our body, matters enough to God that he would accept the human body with all its kind of functionality and dysfunction as his own. And so that's got to have some impact on the way that Catholics kind of envision their spiritual lives as not just being matters of mind or emotions. Again, those things are important, but also matters of flesh, matters of the body.
Yeah, I'm thinking to practices like fasting, which I'm always a big proponent of. Now, I got into fasting originally from a purely secular point of view, just looking at the research behind fasting, the positive benefits, how you could use it for weight loss and things like that. So now looking at it through the Catholic lens, well, to me, that has to be at least one component of it, right? That has to be one of those contribute. I don't think it's the only one, and I certainly can't prove it, right? At least through the statistics here. But that would be something I would very much suspect is playing a role. Is the sort of fortitude, the temperance, which all comes from those Catholic virtues that again Aquinas was so good at explaining. They have to be contributing to these statistics in some degree.
I think so too. But another thing that's just occurring to me right now is that as a Catholic, you can sanctify suffering. Mm-hmm. There's kind of you can establish a spiritual rapport between your own sufferings and the sufferings of Christ that can have a positive benefit on others. And the benefit might not be something that you're immediately aware of or even aware of at all, but there's kind of this, as I said, a spiritual rapport which can sanctify or redeem your suffering. So that when it comes to these practices of asceticism that generally involve the body in some way for Catholics, like fasting that you mentioned, that we're willing to do it, not just because of a physical benefit, but because it can have this broader spiritual benefit that gives it kind of a meaning and purpose that is even beyond the ego. So the ego might say, I'm going to fast because I want to look better, or basically, I'm going to fast because I'm really taking bodybuilding seriously, and I'm in a cutting phase or something like that. So so I'm basically fasting. But for the Catholic, it's like you can even move beyond those ego-driven or personal desires to something that's enhancing your relationship with God. And through enhancing your relationship with God, enhancing your relationship with others in unforeseen ways. So I think that might also be playing to this, that when Catholics hear, well, you need to kind of have less in terms of caloric intake, they're like ready for it because they've got a spiritual frame of reference to actually deal with it. Whereas somebody who doesn't have that spiritual frame of reference might provoke an existential crisis. Like, well, why would I do this? You know, it's far more comforting for me not to. So where the Catholic might say, you know, a little bit of discomfort actually is of spiritual import and benefit to a person.
Yeah, and I really like that. And that's something that, again, resonates in my own life and that I have found to be extremely helpful. That again, and this is a point that I've been trying to make, is that when you do become religious, it doesn't take everything else down. It lifts everything else up. For me, it made fitness all the more meaningful. It made fasting all the more meaningful. It not only enhanced my dedication to the practice, it gave me certain motivations that weren't fleeting, that weren't tied to any one specific egotistical goal, that were, to use for lack of a better term, transcendent in some way, that were concrete and that would mean just as much now to me as they will, hopefully when I'm 90 years old. If the statistics are true, I probably have a pretty good shot of getting there, right?
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying with that, Father Steve?
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the thing, that, Catholicism has this rich tradition of what's called asceticism, which is that you accept certain forms of personal deprivation for a greater good. Mm-hmm. And the greatest good being that it enhances charity, enhances your ability to love. But you're willing to make sacrifices, intentional sacrifices, for that purpose. And we call that asceticism. Now, there's kind of negative forms of asceticism when you're just punishing your body because you think it's wicked or evil or sinful or something like that. And that's a negative form of asceticism. That's not really constructive or creative. The Catholic thing really isn't a negative form of asceticism, though there's examples of it in the long history of the church. It's really a positive thing, that these practices of asceticism, these kind of instances of personally chosen intentional deprivation, are meant to lead to personal and communal flourishing. Mm-hmm. If you do these things and you do them right and with the correct intentionality and with the right purpose and in a way that's creative, that's going to lead not only to your own flourishing, but to other people's flourishing. So, these great kind of periods of the church's year, Advent and Lent, where Catholics will generally take on ascetical practices. That's intended to make them a better person, and it's intended to make better people around them. And so, again, getting back to my point, that maybe Catholics are more willing to engage some of these issues of health because they have those spiritual frames of reference in place. And then getting back to our earlier part of this conversation, whereas it seems to be statistically that religion can have the effect of making people healthier and live longer. Well, let's look again at those practices, not just as kind of negative or guilt-inducing things, but as having real positive benefit, real kind of humanistic benefit.
Yeah. Now, there's a number of things I want to come back and touch on that. But one thing that struck me is, and I've seen this happen before, people are like, well, why don't we just kind of look at some of these practices in these religions, and maybe this is why they have a healthier BMI. And I know maybe we could talk about the controversy around BMI later, but BMI is only one part of these statistics. Maybe that, take some of these practices that these religious people are engaging in. Maybe we can extract them from the religion. We don't actually have to be religious about it. We could just do fasting anyways, or we could do prayer anyways, or meditation anyways. What's the problem with that, Father Steve?
I think that you're going to run into the wall of the ego. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a block. And so you'll get so far, and then you're going to run into the ego, and the ego is not going to let you go any further than that.
Yeah.
And what happens, I think, as it tends to happen, is the ego then begins to say, okay, this kind of deprivation was okay for a time, but we want comfort. Mm-hmm. We want security. And so we don't want to do this anymore. And there isn't the transcendent reference that pulls one out of the ego that's present in religion. Mm-hmm. So you can take kind of the, I think like the categories of what they call like mindfulness, and it was just kind of a secularization of prayer, it seems to me. Or you can take fasting out of its religious context, and then I think you'll get some traction, some mileage out of that, but eventually it's going to run out of gas.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to run out of fuel, and the reason it does is because these practices really are not just meant to give you a better body. They're meant to engage the soul, which, as you referenced earlier, is containing the body. And the soul wants more. The soul wants these practices to imbue the life with a sense of the presence of God. And when that's in place, there's far more purpose, meaning, intentionality behind the practices themselves.
And I will personally attest to all of that, because again, I engaged in fasting and meditation before I was a religious person, and I ran into every one of those problems. Either the ego got in the way, or it just, I just kind of got bored of it, right? And it wasn't until I had that transcendent anchor point that, again, raised everything up, made all of those practices so much more meaningful, that they were no longer just fleeting habits or phases in a dietary program or something. They were directed towards something that was greater than myself. And because I had that connection, it enabled me to not only, again, dedicate myself more deeply to these practices and get more out of them, but to orient them, and I would also say, in a much more productive and charitable way as well. So I think, I know I just totally sprung that question out of nowhere on you, but I think you nailed it out.
No, here's a little story that, I was in the gym a few months ago, and I kind of, I'm somewhat of an interesting presence there, because a lot of people there know I'm a priest. And this one younger bodybuilder came up to me, and he's like, you're like pretty good at this, and it surprises me. And like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you doing this? You're like a priest. This is not his kind of sense of what priests should be doing. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, it makes me a better priest. Mm-hmm. And that kind of surprised him a little bit. And then I begged the question of him was like, how is this helping you in the various relationships of your life? And he kind of got really thoughtful about that. And I said, and how is this helping you in your relationship with God? And so again, the thing is, I'm trying to move beyond just the ego-driven desire, like, I want bigger muscles, or I want to get stronger, I want to look better. All those things can, have a positive benefit on your self-esteem and stuff like that. Give you something practical or creative to do in the course of a day. But the soul wants more. The soul wants more. And be it your practices of bodybuilding or whatever kind of interest you have in your life, as soon as you hit that wall of the ego, you know that the transcendent is calling. The transcendent kind of wants a reference point in what you're doing. And now, I don't know if I'm being clear in that, but that's my little story there. That, just as I'm honest, I'm being totally honest that the bodybuilding's made me a better priest. Why? Because I've got a transcendent reference in place related to that practice.
I'll just echo the point again, because, and this goes to show just how tight the God hold really is. When I was completely secular for so long, the gym was my church. Like fitness was my religion, more or less, but it was never enough. So then, you would get bored of it, or you'd achieve all the things you'd want, and then it would attach to something else, hey, maybe growing a business or writing a book or something like that. But it was never satisfied. It was never, because it was doing exactly what you said. It was reaching up towards something, and you're sitting down here just kind of scurrying around trying to attach to whatever thing you think will satisfy it. That is anything but, oh no, not religion. We don't want to touch that. Right.
Right.
But then the exact opposite happens. I become religious. And deeply so, I start taking the spiritual practice fully, and then it returns me to all of these things that I really loved before, but maybe fell out of, lost interest in, and it refills them all and gives them new life and new orientation. So I can very confidently say that I love fitness and I'm even better at it now than I ever was before, but I'm doing it for completely different reasons than when I started when I was 16.
Yeah, I would say that's that transcendent reference. That transcendent reference point has broken through the wall of the ego. And when that happens, it's not destructive. The only thing that's destroyed is kind of that wall that's inhibiting you. Mm-hmm. But everything else in you is raised up, is elevated. And getting back to an earlier point, that's what Christians believe about what God does in the incarnation. Mm. That he doesn't kind of accept a body, a human nature, and then hammer it down or break it into pieces or destroy it or indicate that it's evil or wicked. No, he raises it up. He raises up a human nature to share in a divine nature. That's the elevation of all the vital capacities of your physicality, of all the kind of virtues of the soul. Those things get elevated. They get raised up. You find that you're not like being deprived of who you are when you're in relation to Christ in his incarnation, but you're becoming better. That's sanctification. That's what sanctification means. Some people have the perception that the saint's kind of a sad sack, somebody who's kind of just lost everything. Mm-hmm. And you know, how pathetic. But no, the saint is an elevated person, that all the vital capacities of their life are just at full force, at full power, because they've kind of brought into themselves that transcendent reference point. Like I said, the wall of the ego has come down. And when that happens, and your experience tested this, you get raised up. You get elevated.
And that's such a common myth, isn't it? And I fell right into that camp, right into that department. I thought that religion was something that distracted people, that suppressed their potentials or at least from actualizing their potentials. It was really something that just kind of weighed and dragged people down. But I could not have been more wrong, either in my personal experience, in my philosophy about it, or even if I would have just bothered to just go look up the statistics, I could have cleared away that confusion.
Yeah, I would say, Pat, that bad religion does that. Mm-hmm. You know, bad religion does that to people. But you know what? So does bad politics and bad culture. And you could say, so does bad fitness training. Yeah. It'll tear you apart. It'll destroy you. So it's kind of like a misapplication of something that's meant to be a positive tool, a positive benefit in people's lives. So bad religion can do that. You've got to kind of discriminate between true religion and false religion. That's really one of the great dramas of biblical revelation. What's true religion? What's false religion? That a lot of people are suffering and they have terrible lives because they're enmeshed in bad religion. But what's a good religion? And I think that what we're kind of discussing here and what's kind of opened up is what good religion is. What does good religion do? It's connected to that great revelation of God in Christ becoming human and elevating humanity to share in a divine nature. That it's connected to that. And when it's connected to that, you see these positive things happening in people's lives. You see kind of love and patience and kindness and forgiveness and compassion and these things all opening up in people's lives. You see a lot of creativity. You see a lot of culture building happening. And that culture building is in all these aspects of life, the arts, the sciences, even like fitness culture. It kind of unleashes a creative energy and potential. That's good religion. Bad religion has a negative impact, like a lot of kind of negative things in life. But when you got good religion in your life, and this survey indicates it, that if these people were engaged in bad religion, it wouldn't be having this optimal effect in terms of their health. So these people in the survey are connected to something that I would say is good religion. And it's worth considering what that is.
You know, it's funny. Something that just popped into mind is a common atheist and humanist, account of morality is if we could just do anything that contributed to human flourishing, well, that is the morally right thing to do. Well, it seems like we have some statistics here to support that it would be morally right to then go and be religious on the atheist account of morality.
Yeah, that would be a really good argument for you to take into one of these atheist forums that you kind of frequent.
Oh yeah, you know me. I love being in those atheist forums. I mean, first off, I would have to say they're confusing moral semantics with ontology before we even get there. But given the premise, we might as well just go be religious anyways.
Yeah. So this is actually a good thing for human flourishing. But no, this is very interesting. Let's go back to kind of the criteria, some of the criteria in the study.
Yeah,
we want people to take this study seriously. That know that we've kind of looked at this thing, and one of the issues that came up in a conversation here was this body mass index thing. Mm-hmm. Now they're indicating using the body mass as an indicator of health, and I've heard kind of some controversial things. So maybe you, as kind of an expert in that area, could illuminate some kind of facts about body mass index as an indicator of health.
So I would say it's not as accurate as I would say most lay people assume, or as a lot of articles that you might read on a popular level will make it seem, but it's not as inaccurate as so many people in the fitness profession would make it seem, right? So I actually am not somebody who's anti-BMI. I think you just need the right nuanced perspective of it. Because obviously you could take somebody like yourself, very muscular, low body fat. If you go get the BMI test done, you're probably not going to get that good of a ranking, right? But then go test all your other biomarkers. I'm sure you're very, very healthy. And that's just a consequence of just working out, physical strength training. So as long as you're able to pull apart those differences and account for those differences, then BMI is still very much a useful tool. You just have to take a little bit more of a nuanced perspective to it and realize that, among athletes and people who are engaged in strength training or bodybuilding, you might just have some muddled statistics in there.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And just correlating it to the spiritual life, something that as a spiritual director that I've said to people, your spiritual life is never just going to be about one thing that you do. Mm-hmm. It's going to be about a lot of things that you do. So you've got your prayer, you've got your scripture study, you've got your works of mercy, you've got all these types of things at play in the spiritual life. And we can look at them all in their particularity, but we also got to look at the totality. Mm-hmm. Like the totality of all these practices that you're engaged in. And the barometer of soul health, of spiritual health, is kind of the aggregate of that.
Yeah.
So and what you're saying I think is important is you'd never just look at one kind of quality of physical health as being the indicator. Mm-hmm. You'd look at many. So you correct me if I'm wrong, you could have a person who is remarkably fit but has high blood pressure.
That's
and
exactly.
that you as a fitness professional might be able to say, we got to deal with that. Mm-hmm. We got to look at that. But that's not the only criteria. It's not the only criteria, but it's one of the criteria. So the body mass index thing too, and the clarification you gave. So when I do the body mass index, I'm overweight.
I was going to say
my height and my weight ratio. But the thing is, it's not fat. I'm carrying a lot more muscle on my frame. So that's one criteria. And you as a fitness professional would look at me and say, oh, you got this, and this, and this is the reason for that particular thing.
Yeah. So
spiritual life is somewhat similar.
And so I always try to make this distinction is health itself is somewhat hard to define, but I think the best definition would be something like the ideal interplay of the organs and bodily systems would be a good definition of health. Yeah. Whereas fitness is really just the ability to complete a task. So I can be very, very fit at a task or a series of tasks, but also very, very unhealthy. I could be extremely fit at the back squat, but snap my spinal cord. I'm super fit, very unhealthy, right? Because a snapped spinal cord would not be anything like the ideal state of the bodily systems or your play. So it is important to have a distinction between those two. As for BMI, this would be a bad measurement if the majority of people were engaged in whoever you're measuring the population, if the majority of those people were engaged in bodybuilding. But let's be perfectly honest, that is not anywhere close to most people, right? But when you're looking at bodybuilders and people who are strength training, well then you take other assessments into account, as you should with really everybody. But as a whole, I would not be somebody who says don't look at the BMI or get rid of the BMI. It actually does, I would say, help us more than it hurts us, as long as, again, we're willing to look into all the other factors, many of which you've already hinted at.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, somebody could say to me as a priest, well, I think I'm spiritually healthy. And I'd be, okay, let's talk about your life. And they go, well, what do you mean by that? And I go, well, I just go to Mass on Sunday and that's it. Like, that's it. And I might say, well, you know what? You're probably lacking in other areas. There's a little bit more to it. Like, that's kind of the culmination of a lot of other things in your life as a Catholic.
Yeah.
It's the greatest thing, but it ain't the only thing.
So
that's what just occurred to me as you were making those observations.
So I'd just be curious to draw the analogy to fitness, because same thing. Like, oh, okay, I'm fit. Well, how often do you go to gym? Well, 1 hour a week. Okay. Is that the only physical activity you're doing there? Right? Yeah.
And what if they're really good at it? They're really good at that 1 hour.
Yeah.
But their nutritional house is a wreck.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would be kind of the thing that, you got that down. You got obligatory Mass on Sunday down. But your life in terms of charity is a wreck.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not talking about optimal spiritual health, just as for that person who's coming to the gym and they're really on task, on point for what they're doing for that hour. But the rest of it, the nutritional thing, is the missing part of the missing piece.
So this might be interesting, and I'm very curious on your take of this. When it comes to the gym, we look at all these different variables. We look at frequency, how often we work out. We look at intensity, how hard our workout is, how much weight we're lifting. We look at duration, how long the workout goes for. Are there some spiritual analogies, if I can talk straight, that we can draw there? Like, okay, so we have the duration of going to Mass for 45 minutes, but maybe we need that intensity of a really deep prayer practice or charitable giving or something. I don't know. When you look at exercise variables like that, and then how would those kind of
if we take the fact that our religion, Catholicism, is embodied,
mm-hmm.
that your body matters, that means that grace is building upon nature, which means there's going to be a lot of practices in your life.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a lot of things you actually do. That's how the Holy Spirit, that's how grace is sanctifying you. It's kind of motivating you towards action, towards activity. If you're limiting that activity to the bare minimum, you're not getting what God wants you to have.
Mm-hmm.
You're not getting the gifts He wants you to have through your spiritual life. You're demonstrating a lack of receptivity towards the grace He wants you to give through these practices.
Mm-hmm. And that's
where I think it would connect. That's where we connect. It would be like not just one thing, but all these things are possibilities for you, and they're gifts that God wants you to have. So take them, engage them.
And that's really the point of works, isn't it? I think so many people, including myself, for the longest time, really misunderstood what that meant. But as I continue to really engage in that spiritual practice and make myself receptive to it, I find that I am compelled to these things more or less, almost automatically. Is kind of what falls out of the spiritual practice, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, I just view them as kind of all these practices of the Catholic faith as gifts from Christ that are really opportunities and events of encounter with Him.
Mm.
So for example, like, you're not obligated to engage in the practice of Eucharistic adoration.
Mm-hmm.
You're not obligated, but obligation isn't the point here. It's gift.
Mm-hmm.
So His divine life and presence is something He wants to give to you. He wants you to rest in His presence in prayer and adoration. He wants to give it to you. And you can say no to any gift that you're given,
mm-hmm.
but then that raises the question: why would you refuse that? Why would you refuse that kind of gift? Because it's kind of like, Pat, I'm going to give you $1,000, and you're like, forget it,
man,
you don't want it.
Mm.
This is far greater significance than the $1,000 gift, and it's just like, well, I don't want that. I got something else to do, or something like that. But well, you missed out on the gift,
mm-hmm.
or the practices of Lent, prayer, fasting, almsgiving. Now you look at those as kind of brutal obligations. Or you can say, you know what, it's really kind of a gift that I can freely pray, that I can freely offer myself in this practice of fasting, that I actually am given so much by the Lord that I can actually share what I'm given with others. That it's like, it's a gift. And so it's like, let me receive it. Let me receive it, Lord.
It really is a gift. And as somebody who has a long history of monkey brain and OCD tendencies and anxiety and things like that, adoration is such a gift to be able to go and just and meditate and pray for that period of time and have that repose has become such an essential part of my spiritual practice that, again, has spilled over and made me so much healthier and more stable overall. So again, it just points right back to everything we've kind of been talking about. It's by receiving and acting upon these gifts that it really has helped me on a very physical and emotional level as well. I don't want to toss the emotional out. It's all connected. It's all important.
Sure. Health is all these components of mind and emotions and body. So it is all those things. But you got to have a body to have emotions and a mind. And from training people, the impact of kind of having a bad body on people's minds and emotions.
Yes, it works. It works both ways.
Physical health, getting people in shape changes their minds, and it changes the way they feel.
Yeah, and
what this survey is indicating is that these great practices of the religious life, people who engage them, they think better, they feel better, and their bodies are better.
Wow, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. And again, I will link this on the show notes page so everybody can have access. But if we could just take a few more minutes again, Father Steve, to kind of talk about all the things that you've got going on. I watched the first episode of The Mass with my wife, Christine, and we absolutely love that. But are you still, you work as a producer on a lot of these series, right?
Correct. I'm the executive producer for all the various kind of projects for Word on Fire.
That's amazing. So, I mean, yeah. So when you,
I have that broad oversight of all the things that the apostolate's engaged in. So I'm the CEO. I'm the CEO for the whole organization. So with everything that entails that, so I'm ultimately responsible for what's happening with Word on Fire to Bishop Barron. And then I'm the executive producer. So we have all these things that we're producing, not just films, but books and study materials and stuff like that. So I would have, oversight of those things as well.
So people probably wonder, like, well, how do you do all that and still find the time to have, your spiritual and physical practice? But you would probably say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it's because of the spiritual and physical practice that you can do all those things.
That's correct. I can do all things in Christ who strengthens me. Yeah. And I take that literally and seriously. That, if he asks me to do it, then I have to kind of turn myself over to him and say, okay, I'm willing to do it. You show me how. And it's that attitude of trust towards him. Like, I'm going to show you the way, but then I got to trust him. I have to trust him. Now, it's hard to keep all these things kind of together and keep them moving. But you know what the Lord also sends into our lives when we kind of respond to his call? He sends us other people to help us. And so that what surrounds Bishop Barron and what surrounds me is this great team of people who are mission oriented and they want to help. And so that's how the whole thing gets done. So it's never just dependent on any one person. It's dependent upon this network of people. And that's how the church works best. And I think you'd say as a businessman, that's how business works best too.
Yeah, it really is. The more you're willing to give of yourself and to others, the more, God definitely sends back your way to help you fulfill that mission when you have that right orientation. I love everything you're doing. I find it tremendously inspiring, you personally and all the mission work that Word on Fire consistently puts out. And I want to make sure that everybody can get connected because there's so many different things going on. I can't wait for the pivotal players. Who's left on that, by the way? Because we love that series too.
Okay, so we got this summer we're doing Fulton Sheen,
Oh, awesome.
Archbishop Fulton Sheen, and we're doing Flannery O'Connor.
Oh,
so
yeah.
we're doing the two Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got Ignatius of Loyola next summer and Bartolomeo de las Casas.
Oh, that's...
So Ignatius because of the Jesuits and the impact of that, but Las Casas, who is a Dominican, because he's the first person really in Western culture who articulated a cohesive understanding of human rights. So the entire kind of Western tradition of human rights emerges from that Dominican friar who in the 15th century says, you know, these people in the New World, of what you're calling the New World, these people whom you're calling Indians are actually human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what it means to be a human being and to have rights. So we're doing those. Those are the last two we have to do, and that'll be next summer. But it's Fulton Sheen, Archbishop Fulton Sheen, who was the great pioneer of evangelization through the media.
Mm-hmm.
So very, very important for Bishop Barron and for anyone who's doing the kind of Catholic media work that we're doing. But then Flannery O'Connor, who was a great American novelist and short story writer who's had this profound cultural impact beyond what most people realize.
Mm-hmm.
That much of the narratives, much of the stories that are coming out in popular fiction and film and television, that she's the precursor of their methods of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of Catholic novelist from Georgia, who spent much of her life just on her family's farm, ended up having this great cultural impact. And what a deep woman of faith. And you know, talk about sanctification through the body of suffering. She suffered from lupus and would die of that.
Mm-hmm.
But it occasioned this not only productivity and creativity, but this great spiritual transformation on her part. So we're going to tell her story too.
That's great. I mean, she's one of my favorites. A tremendous woman, an extremely a thomist, right? Like she would read like Summa like every night, right? Wasn't that her thing?
Yes.
It's like
she would read a section of the Summa. Oh, well, she's great. She's great, and all your listeners should kind of find Flannery O'Connor's letters. Start there. Read her letters. And because there's this great testimony to the faith, and through the letters get into her short stories, because then you're going to know what she's up to.
Yeah, I'm gonna link that in the show notes for people as well. So Father Steve, thanks again so much. What is the best way for people to make sure they're staying in touch with Word on Fire and they can keep up and consume all this awesome material?
I'm going to give you 3 ways that people can engage with Word on Fire. One is our robust website, which is wordonfire.org. wordonfire.org. So go there, and it's the repository of all our kind of materials are there. The second place you need to go is Bishop Robert Barron's Facebook page. Lively Facebook page. You get daily posts, daily gospel reflections from the bishop himself. So that's another route of access that's really important. And the third way is Bishop Robert Barron's YouTube channel, where there's like over 400 videos on all sorts of things. Movie reviews, cultural commentary, videos about the Catholic faith. So those 3 things, wordonfire.org, Bishop Robert Barron's Facebook page, and then Bishop Robert Barron's YouTube channel.
Excellent. Again, I'm going to link all those in the show notes. So if you are listening, head over to chroniclesofstrength.com and just find the page related to this episode for easy access to all of that. Father Steve, always a pleasure to talk with you. I really hope we get to do this again soon.
Thank you, Pat, and it was just a joy to be with you today.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.